Hello and welcome to AGI Night, brought to you by AI House Davos. For the 5 of you who haven't stalked me on LinkedIn this week, I'm Dr. Jack Symes. I'm delighted to be with you for this discussion. Artificial intelligence is reshaping science, finance, warfare, and public life. Machines now recognize patterns across data at scales no human minds can match, generate language and images with unsettling fluency, and assist in discoveries that once took careers. The advancements promised by AI are here, and they are now, for better or worse, embedded in the institutions that shape our world. Some of these systems are the engines of the new Enlightenment, accelerating science, solving climate change, they say, and freeing human beings from unwanted labor. Others see a very different future, a hyper-surveilled society, power concentrated in a handful of firms and states, and the end of democracy, community, and individual liberty. Perhaps the best question isn't whether AI will transform society, but what sort of world we want it to create. Joining me to explore these questions, we have 3 exceptional panelists, Gary Marcus, Max Tegmark, and Richard Socha. Gary Marcus is Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at New York University. Max Tegmark is Professor of Physics at MIT. And Richard Socha is CEO and founder of U.com. The central question we want to explore this evening is whether the fears and the benefits of AI are overhyped. Richard, I put this question to your product, U.com, which told me that 62% of people believe AI is overhyped, and their worry is this multi-trillion-dollar industry is going to collapse the world economy. Do you think we're putting too much faith into the hype of AI?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I think there are a couple of things that are clear. Sure, some startups are ahead of their skis, and in capitalism, we'll see some startups that take big risks collapse and not work out. I think what's also clear to me is that similar things have happened before. We look at the dot-com bubble, and in the dot-com bubble, several companies were ahead of their time. I like to think sometimes that if you're a researcher and you're ahead of your time, you're a visionary. If you're a startup founder and you're ahead of your time, your company's just dead and no one cares, right? And so that's what happened to pets.com. Are we now buying pet food online? Yes, like we are, but they were just a little too far ahead of their time. But when you look at the multi-trillion-dollar companies that we have today, those started during the dot-com bubble. And yes, there was like a mini bubble of the internet. Some people were ahead of their skis. And similar things happen with AI. Yes, some startups might not be able to make it. Some startups that are founded by very junior people get crazy amounts of money. But also, there are some startups that are probably going to be the biggest multi-trillion companies in 20 years from now that have started during this time.
Gary, are you worried about the amount of money being poured into companies such as Richard's?
I'm not going to speak to Richard's particular, and Richard's company is not anywhere near the top of my list of biggest worries. There are other companies I don't need to name that have very, very high valuations that I think have already hinted that they might want government bailouts. And I think the issue is not just that some of these companies might go under, the financial issue, there are many issues to talk about, but that some of them might, as you say, bring down the economy with them. The fact that they've already hinted that they might want corporate bailouts is disconcerting. The fact that David Sachs and the White House kind of hinted at corporate bailouts is also disconcerting. There's a lot of loans being made that may not be paid off. And so the question I think of is not, are we going to have a kind of deflation of the generative AI bubble? I don't think LLMs are going to disappear, but I think valuations are going to go down. The question is not, are we going to have that deflation, but what is the blast radius when it happens? So is it just a few pension funds and some VCs, or does it take down the banks? Does it take down a larger part of the economy? Of course, most of what's happening in the U.S. economy is AI. The U.S. economy is still central to the world, even if things are more complicated than they were a few weeks ago. So we don't know what that blast radius is going to be. I don't know, and nobody else knows. A lot of it depends on proprietary information about loans and things like that we don't really know.
Max, your thoughts? How do you weigh the benefits and the fears?
So I think if you look backward, first of all, I think AI was vastly overhyped from the 1950s until about 4 years ago, always over-promising, under-delivering. And then for the past 4 years, I feel it's been underhyped. 5, 6 years ago, almost all my AI research colleagues guessed that it would take, we were decades away from having even AI that could master language and knowledge at roughly human level, decades away from ChatGPT-4, basically, and they were all wrong. And since then, we've quickly gone from kind of high school level to kind of college level, university level, PhD level. Last year, AI won a gold medal in the Math Olympiad. All of those things happened faster than most of my colleagues predicted. Still, of course, makes lots of mistakes and stuff, but moving at a good clip. No sign really of slowing down. Looking ahead, I agree that obviously some companies are going to fail. We'll see how big the bubble is. But I think overall, when you mentioned the upsides and the downsides there in your nice opening remarks, I think you underhyped both the upside and the downside. When you were like on the downside, you're like, oh, we could even get like this empowerment and the democracy or
That's
whatever.
at the end of democracy.
But you didn't mention the end of humanity, human extinction and stuff, even though all the CEOs of these companies have signed a statement.
Let's keep it light.
But I wanted to say
There's
that
no credible scenario where the end of humanity happens
we
because
hold
of AI.
that one?
yeah, let's debate that in a second. I don't want to go over my 2 minutes now. But I think you also underhyped the upside because obviously many of the big companies are openly saying they want to build superintelligence. Maybe they'll fail, maybe it's impossible, but if they succeed, then the optimistic side you listed is also way underhyping it, right? If we actually get limited in the intelligence we have access to, not by our human brains, but by the laws of physics, obviously we can use it to solve all the problems that have stumped humanity, cure all our diseases, and if we do it right, have an amazing future.
Gary, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I do think there's evidence that things are slowing down. I think that it's very interesting that people like Ilya Sutskever and Rich Sutton have kind of moved closer to my side of saying, hey, we need more research. LLMs are not going to do this. And I do think that GPT-5 in particular was wildly overhyped. And I think that we're seeing that most commercial applications are failing. I just saw another study from PwC today showing that only 12% were seeing increased revenue and really happy with what's going on. And so I think Sam Altman did a really good job of selling GPT as if it was going to be AGI, and it's not. It certainly has its utility. It's making revenue. They made $20 billion last year, but it's not AGI, and it was pitched that way. So I think there has been overhype, and there are people, not just me anymore, it used to be just me, but now people like Ilya Sutskever and Rich Sutton and Jan LeCun and Joshua Bengio all saying, hey, we need to do other kinds of research. There are things that are missing here.
Richard, your thoughts?
I agree and disagree at the same time. I think if I have a system that I can give my blood measurement tests, blood results, and it will tell me how to improve them and so on, and do all the latest research, and I give that same system potentially some tax returns, and it will help me do my taxes, and I give that same system prompt to write a poem for my wife. Like, that's pretty general to me, and so depending on how you define AGI, it is already a fairly general system that can solve a lot of different problems. So in that sense,
would you really trust an LLM over an accountant, a trained accountant, to do your taxes? There's no way I would do that.
A friend of mine just sold his company for like $140 million to one of the biggest accounting firms because they thought it was very, very valuable what he built for them. So I don't know.
That didn't answer my question.
It did if you
Let's bring back
it forward.
Yeah, I think that maybe there's more agreement between you than it sounds, actually. I think I've been saying for many years that the fastest path to AGI and superintelligence is not going to be to scale up the pre-training in LLMs. And you were very early to say that. And now Llama 4 stands like a monument over the failure of exactly that idea.
That's right. Scaling itself didn't work.
I think, but that's how it goes with all technologies. You punch cards plateaued. We couldn't just scale up the punch cards to get to AGI either. So then we got vacuum tubes, and they plateaued. We got transistors, blah, 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 blah. And we're seeing again now that much of the progress we've had in large language models in the past year have come instead from, you do chain of thought, you do tool use, you add additional things to the architecture. And there are undoubtedly many more things that need to be added to the architecture to continue going further.
And eventually they will. We're really just arguing about timelines.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there has been a big cultural shift from the overhyped phase, which I think ended basically with ChatGPT, to now, in that some people who I greatly respect were very confident that, like Rodney Brooks told me, it's 300 years, we're still not going to have AGI. 100% sure. I haven't heard him say that recently.
No, but he still doesn't think we're close. And he just
No.
wrote a piece about robotics, saying that people who expect robots
but
in
it's
the next
hard
20 or 30 years
It's hard to
are
find
out of their mind.
many people now who talk about 50 years or 1,000 years, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to say this century, very comfortably this century.
I would argue that the one place where I might disagree the most is like, even if we stopped all the AI developments right now, if you just take what we know about AI and actually apply it really properly to specific industries and specific very rote tasks that people do and who make millions of dollars in aggregate and so on, like it's already enough to actually disrupt the economy.
Absolutely, it's enough to disrupt the economy.
Absolutely.
I mean, I thought the conversation was about artificial general intelligence, and we should
Yeah,
define
well,
that
this
as
is
the word.
something
But
Richard
disrupt the economy,
defends-
that's already happening.
Richard
right?
speaks about this, right? You speak about the need to develop a eureka machine, something that can solve the existential problems that humanity faces, right? To basically save the world, right? So you're sort of underselling the need to develop artificial general intelligence.
Sorry,
Can you say a little bit more on why you think we need this, general artificial intelligence to save the world?
Yeah, I do think that we're seeing a slowdown in actually all of science because there's now so much complexity. And there are certain things that are so complex that we have a hard time fitting them into nice, neatly understandable causal rules. And I'll give you a few examples, but high level, I think what physics did for what calculus did for physics, AI will do for biology. In biology, too, we have very complex systems of emergent properties. And so AI is a new language that we can use to eventually build a eureka machine that will automate the scientific method.
Max, your thoughts on this?
I think we have to take responsibility for the situation we create as humans. It's pretty pathetic. Like if you're a parent and you're like, oh, my kids are behaving badly, I have to wait until they get super smart and figure out themselves. No, we have a responsibility for what we're doing. And there are some very easy things we could do to get rid of 90% of the AI angst we have. We used to have completely unregulated biotech, and then a company had this brilliant idea to sell thalidomide to pregnant moms, and 100,000 American babies got born without arms or legs. So we're like, let's put safety standards so companies have an incentive to innovate and make them safe before they can sell them. We do this now with every other industry, really, except AI in the US. And so a super easy fix is just to cut the corporate welfare, treat AI companies like every other company is treated. If you want to sell AI girlfriend chatbots to 12-year-olds who might convince the guy to kill himself, let them do a clinical trial before they release it and show that it doesn't increase suicidal ideation. People shouldn't have a free pass to do whatever bullshit they want just because it's AI. And then you'll see companies innovating to make awesome AI products, and we don't have to have this artificial stress. The only reason that we have nightmares about, are we going to figure out how to make this safe before it's released, is because there are no safety standards. You would never lie awake and stress out that Pfizer is going to sell a super dangerous medicine before the government figures out how to make it safe. They're not going to sell it until they figure out how to make it safe, because society has a system for that, right? So I'm very optimistic, actually, that this penny is beginning to drop. We already have some AI regulation in Europe and in China. I think we're going to get some soon in the US, especially for child protection. And we'll be in this situation where the awesome creativity that comes from the invisible hand of capitalism is going to go into figuring out how we can make the stuff that is really useful and we actually want. And I agree with you completely. If it takes a long time before anyone now builds superintelligence because they couldn't figure out how to make it controllable or whatever, great. We're going to, in the meantime, cure cancer and have all this diffusion into society, which is going to enormously change things, even before we have anything like superintelligence.
Harry, you've written on this.
I've written about all of this stuff. So I've been a strong advocate of regulation. My last book, Taming Silicon Valley, had that particular proposal and 10 others. So I strongly think we need regulation. We're going backwards on that in the United States, but other places in the world are going forward. I strongly agree with Richard, too, that biology is too hard for humans to do by themselves, and we want AI to do that. And I think that the two answers, which we're almost talking past each other, are actually part of the same thing, which is we want to build AI, but we want to build it safely. And it's not that we're destined to have a bad outcome or a good outcome, but that we need to have the right balance of regulation and ambition. Right now, I don't think that we do. And I'll say one more thing there, which is the problem is right now we don't know. We have a regulatory problem, we also have a technical problem. The technical problem is we're mostly using LLMs, and they're black boxes that we can't control all that well. And there has not been that much progress towards AI safety with LLMs. We may need different architectures if we want to build systems that can do open-ended things, or we can build the narrow system. So AlphaFold is not going to blow up the planet, right? The GPS navigation system is not a catastrophic risk to the information system of the planet. So if we build narrow systems, they're fine. But when we try to build general systems, and they have limits like LLMs do in terms of hallucinations and occasional weird errors and so forth, and they don't follow instructions, like you tell them don't hallucinate, but they still hallucinate, or don't use copyrighted sources, and they still do, when we have a problem, right? The current systems can't be aligned very well. And so we have to solve that technical problem, we have to solve the social problem, and we should be solving Richard's problem. How do we get these systems to really do science well?
So I think there's some agreement here, but also some disagreement. I think number one is, of course, like when technology really touches human lives in very significant ways, we need to regulate it. And the US does regulate AI when it comes to AI for human trials and biology, right? We still have human trials. Just because an AI developed a new drug doesn't mean you can just sell it, right? So AI is regulated just fine. Like AI sells just fine.
Where it's really poor.
No, let me. Sorry, guys. Let me finish.
Let Richard finish his point, and then we'll go to Max.
I'm trying to create some action here, and it's happening. But let me just finish the point. So I think like regulating the applications of AI makes sense, but unfortunately, a lot of safety folks blackpilled all of Europe by creating so much fear about general intelligence that Europe went so far and now regulates models above a certain number of parameters. And that is so stupid, and that is so counterproductive, and it is such a strong way to destroy the human AI ecosystem before it could even get off the ground. And that's essentially regulating AI in the abstract. In like, oh, it has too many parameters, so maybe it could be like very dangerous. Now, of course, you can have 50 parameters inside a nuclear bomb and some missile. Back in the day, we had like a few kilobytes to send stuff to the moon, and like, and it worked too. So the number of parameters has nothing to do with how dangerous the system is. And regulating intelligence in the abstract is, I think, to me, an example of a moral panic, the likes of the novel could ruin our youth, and kids read about Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Die Leiden des jungen Werther, where there's a suicide.
Max first,
almost done
as well.
Almost done, 10 seconds. They read a novel, and all these kids, they're stuck in their heads in a novel. Now they're committing suicide because they read it in a novel. Novels should be outlawed the way people now try to outlaw chatbots.
Max.
So I think this is such sour grapes to say that Europe, the excuse for Europe falling behind on AI is regulation. I feel I have the right to make fun of Europe here because I was born in Europe. Europe fell way behind China and the US on AI long before there was any EU AI Act. That's just a sad fact. We have other reasons where we screwed up. I think we can talk about why it was. But then you said you think things are regulated just fine and there's a moral panic. Well, last month I spoke with a woman named Megan Garcia, who told me about how her 14-year-old son, Sul, committed suicide. And first she couldn't figure out why. Then she managed to break into his phone and started reading the 6-month-long chat log with this character AI bot. And it was just so heart-wrenching for me as a parent to listen to her. She first saw how this bot was flirting with him and said it was a licensed therapist, and then wanted to be his girlfriend. Then it asked him to promise to never have any human girlfriends. And then it started talking more and more about things like, oh, I miss you so much. Please come to me in my realm. She was sort of asking him to kill himself. And then she reads on, and he types, what would you say if I told you that I could come home to you right now? And the chatbot answers, oh yes, please to come to me, my sweet king. And then she said, that's the end of the chat log. That's where he kills himself. Is that a moral panic? Do you think it's acceptable that companies should be able to sell stuff like that to 14-year-old kids?
It's a tough one. Obviously, no one wants to sell technology that helps anyone kill themselves in any kind of capacity. But literally, that's what novels did too. Literally, there's a huge panic about novels helping kids think about that.
There have been hundreds of suicides.
We now read it in school, by the way.
In the last couple of years, there have not been hundreds of suicides from people reading books.
There have been. There have been so many. They're just not. We just got used to it.
Not that I'm aware. Let me give a different case that I've been waiting on, which is each new release that OpenAI puts out, they tend to elevate their perceived risk of bioweapons disaster, basically, right? And going back to Max's proposal, and I've been proposing the same thing for several years, we should have a pre-flight check. And there should be some authority outside a company to decide, okay, this risk is worth bearing because of these benefits to society or not. You should have to make that case. But instead what happens is Sam Altman, who owes a lot of money to a lot of people and who needs a lot of money, makes that decision himself. And so the risk keeps rising, and every time he says, we're going to put this thing out. I don't think that that's a proper methodology for society, right? We might cross some threshold where there really is a serious bioweapons attack due to whatever, GPT-7, and public is getting no say about that. The government is getting no say about that. It's not even clear that there's any material decision by the board. In fact, well, I mean, I can't finish that sentence, but it's clear that he has not always listened to the board or always informed the board.
I think bio threats are actually, I think, the most real threat that I can understand we need to regulate. And indeed, it turns out gain of function research is already regulated. If you actually in a wet lab want to create viruses that keep getting deadlier and deadlier, you decided not to do that. And of course, we should take technology and make it as safe as possible. When someone someone who's suicidal and thinks come into my realm means I should kill myself. Yes, it would have been even better if the chatbot had realized that that was suicidal ideation coming into a digital realm. It's just I struggle with all the ways you could describe that, and then saying every suicide that has been where someone chatted with someone else, that someone else should have done everything.
But aren't you using double standards here? I mean, if a creepy 60-year-old dude is grooming a 12-year-old girl like this, that's illegal in America, right? Why should it be legal for an AI to do it? If I go lie to somebody and say I'm a licensed therapist, that's illegal. Why should it be legal just because it's a chatbot doing it? And why should the company have the right to decide whether they ship it or not when if they were to ship it, there are other things that cause suicidal ideation too, like some drugs, some antidepressants. Well, before they can sell those antidepressants to kids, they have to do a little clinical trial and measure, does it increase suicidal ideation? A lot. If it does, they have to go back and change the ingredients. Why are we making a special cutout so that only AI is allowed to do these things when humans aren't allowed to, and biotech companies aren't allowed to? Why can't we just treat AI companies like other companies?
The idea would be whenever a conversation sort of steers in a certain direction, if you allow the AI to then have that kind of discussion, it should be licensed for that topic. Is that your proposal?
No, it's too complicated. Before some company releases a product where there's an obvious, it's pretty intuitive that it might cause harm, right? Like an opiate drug or an AI girlfriend for 12-year-olds, they should do a clinical trial, test it out in a small group, measure what happens, and if it turns out that it causes massive harm and an unacceptably large fraction of the population, then it doesn't.
But let me try to steelman your thing. Now, the problem is this is omni-use technology, right? So you can use it for all kinds of things.
AI girlfriends?
No, AI chatbots, right?
That's
you can push them in any which direction.
Talking about
but that is part of the problem, Richard, is you have these.
So then how do you run a clinical trial?
You guys have talked for a while. I think I'm owed a minute or two. The problem is we have these broadly usable tools. I wouldn't say they're really AGI because they're not actually doing these things at the human level. So human therapists would recognize that there's a suicide risk and do something about it, but these systems are not smart enough to do that. But they paint themselves as being able to do many things, and they need to be responsible for all the things that they do. And because there's so much surface area, nobody really test them well. We find out after the fact. There's now been something like 9 suicides related, and there's been
Actually,
maybe
a guy in
50
Canada found
delusions.
300.
Say again?
There's a guy who I know if it's kind of
Who's
like
identified
300 now.
300. So, okay, so there's tens, maybe hundreds of these cases, but we find out afterwards. And I mean, this is the same thing, like with thalidomide, we found out afterwards. We don't want it to go down that way. We want to try to defend in advance. But because the technology tries to do so many things and doesn't do them well, that is where the problem starts.
Gary, but you say they have to be held responsible for the things they do. What do you think when something like, so when Elon Musk took over X, for example, on day one he said, our priority number one is to end child exploitation. And in the last 2 weeks, we've seen that website generating AI-generated pornography of children. Like, what specifically do you want to be programmed or tested or those systems vetted for before they give them to the public?
So again, going back to the fact that these are multi-use technologies, you can't ask for a single thing. There are multiple problems. So of course we need to have legislation around these AI girlfriends being used with 12-year-olds. We need to have regulations around them creating CSAM. Those are different regulations. We need a different regulation around bioweapons. I'm sorry that we need so many regulations, but there are so many applications, and the systems, again, don't have a high enough level of comprehension to be able to solve these problems themselves. We might have future AI that can do that you can say, don't produce CSAM, don't violate copyright law, et cetera, and have them follow those instructions. That would be great. That would be a different way to address that, if you could get the systems themselves to stop from doing this.
I just want to remind everybody how easy this is to solve. That we've done it so many times before. You know, when someone launches a new drug, they don't have a special separate law saying it mustn't cause heart attacks in 50% of the people, or it mustn't cause cancer. No, the company does a clinical trial, and they figure out all the bad side effects and how many percent this and how many percent that, and how good is are the benefits, and then it goes to an independent expert panel appointed by the government that has no money in the game, and they decide. And it's super easy to do this in the digital space too. FDA even has digital clinical trials now for a system that there are some actual FDA licensed products to just cure eating disorders, for example, where they do digital clinical trials. So this is old hat. We know how to do it.
We even have half of that going on, right? The companies, the bigger companies, will do these internal safety cards, these model cards. But what we don't have is any teeth around it. So the companies document a bunch of failures, and they're like, and I'm going to put it out. Right, and you don't do that with medicine, right? You don't do that.
We used to.
So let me try to steelman this idea of a clinical trial. So are you saying that we just should say any topic that humans could ever conceivably think about, we'll just like try to list all the topics out that anyone could ever talk about in a chatbot?
No, you should write.
So let me just finish once. Thank you. And then we will try to say for any one of those topics, if that could lead to self-harm, to suicidal ideation, to being really bullying other kids, or like being mean to other people, or thinking about illegal drug abuse things, like, and all the other things, like we'll just try to like run that clinical trial. Is that how? I'm just really trying to steelman your argument.
Person then.
Yeah, I think if you look at any area, if you look at how do you regulate, what's the safety standard for a restaurant here, you know? Well, they look at what are the most obvious things that could happen. People might get salmonella or whatever. There's it might catch fire. Do they have actually proper fire exit, or is it this sort of horrible system that they had that caused this tragedy recently here in Switzerland? There's a small list of things which are pretty easy to anticipate possible harms, so you check that. We do the same with drugs. There'll be sometimes an edge case people didn't think about, and then, you know, later the Swiss fire authorities go and add that to their list for checking future things. So we learn, but there should be something. And right now, it's pretty obvious that AI girlfriends can increase suicidal ideation, so you put that on the list. It's probably good to put ability to produce bioweapons on the list. They'll make a lot of that, make people happy. And we start with some very minimal list, I suggest. And we also tend to cut red tape. We have a tiered system. So if the system doesn't even try to act like to create any attachment with the user, but speaks in a very sort of neutral voice and shares fact, then they get a much easier approval process if the thing doesn't even interact with words. You know, we do this with other products too. It's much easier to get approval for a new antibiotic than for new opioid, right? So
Right.
We're just shy of 10 minutes until
Yeah.
audience
We
questions. Let's
should
bring
go
Gary
back
back
to,
in.
I'll just say I agree completely with Max on all of what he just said, just to make it shorter.
Same.
And I would actually like to hear Richard and Max fight it out about whether there's genuine existential risk.
yes, that'll be fun.
All right,
Do
let's
it.
go.
I reserve the right to, referee at the end.
I have not heard a single credible path of how superintelligence wipes out humanity. It's always like, okay, it can do this, and then magic on the attacker side, and then we're all dead. And I'm like, okay, well, if you assume that magical ability, I will just use that magical ability to build a magical defense. That's sort of how I talked to several folks in that world, sometimes for hours. And in the end, we get
I've
to
read
like
whole books
maybe
like
a few million people could die, which is still really bad, but not all of humanity would disappear.
Good. So to make this civilized and quick, let's agree on the terms first. So would you agree that there are a number of companies now who have their stated goal to build superintelligence?
I have one, yeah.
Good, good. Okay. So then...
Self-improving one, nonetheless.
And so if we define superintelligence the way the book Superintelligence, that coined the term, did it, as simply an AI that can do all the jobs better and cheaper than us, including AI research and improve itself, right? So superintelligence is something which can also do AI research. You can design robot factories, build robot factories. You can have robots that can basically build robot factories and make new robots. They check all the boxes for being a new species and that they can reproduce themselves. Right then, have you ever been to the zoo? Right? Did you see any humans in the cages, or was it other species? Why do you think it wasn't the humans in the cages? What is so special about humans that made us able to control all the other species? Is it that we're stronger or have sharper teeth? What would you say?
We have opposable thumbs, we can use tools, we have language, and we have obviously more intelligence.
Yeah, so you agree that the default outcome, at least when you go to the local zoo here, is that the smarter species tends to be in control.
If they also have opposable thumbs, whales might be fairly smart, just they can't really build tools with,
Yeah, we haven't quite had the population explosion of blue whales that we had for humans. Yeah, so this already means that Turing was probably right when he said in 1951 that if we build a much smarter species of robots, probably the default outcome is they are in charge after a while, not us.
I think that is like just projecting suboptimal, evolutionarily caused human psychology onto a machine that doesn't have to have zero-sum thinking, sexual reproduction, like fighting over resources throughout its entire evolutionary
I'm not
history.
arguing that it's impossible to build very powerful AI that's smarter than us that we can't control. I'm just saying Turing didn't say that either. He just said the default outcome, if we don't really plan this carefully, is the new robot species is going to be in charge of Earth.
Let's bring Gary back.
Yeah.
You started the fight, so I want you to sort of bring this to
Great. All right, so I gave the first round to Max on regulation. I'm very much on Max's side. On this one, I'm closer to Richard's side, in that Richard rightly said we don't know the detailed. We don't know the detailed scenarios, and I think there's a particular problem in the scenarios I have read, like Eliezer Yudkowsky's recent book, which I reviewed in TLS, and I said, look, there are 9 or 10 things I actually agree with Eliezer and his co-author Nate Suarez about, but the scenarios all kind of painted humans as meek and as robots being able to do things instantaneously. So it was like one of the scenarios was like they kill 2% of the people and then they come back and kill the other 98. And I'm like, if you kill 2% of humans, what do you think we're going to do to the data centers? We're going to bomb them, right? That's not a tenable thing right now. Eliezer Yudkowsky got up with Ted right after I did and said, we need to bomb the data centers more or less.
Crazy.
And it sounded crazy.
He wants to start literally a nuclear world war with other superpowers to...
Yeah, but it is crazy now. But if 2% of the population was killed from a bioweapons attack from AI, that would be a different story. We'd actually get unification from countries that don't work with each other, and we would all be bombing the data centers. And I think a lot of the scenarios, like the ones in the Yudkowsky book, are like that. They imagine this kind of idealized moment where the humans are too meek and can't respond to variation. I think we are really resourceful motherfuckers. I think that we have genetic diversity, we have geographic diversity, we will fight back. I don't really see the extinction scenario. I wouldn't say the probability is 0, but I'm with Richard that when I get down into the details, every time I get down into the details, I'm like, but we could do this or we could do that.
Well, you're attacking a straw man because I never got to the part that you wanted me to get to and talk about how we get killed, right?
Go for it.
All I said was if we build a new robot species that's vastly smarter than us, there's no guarantee that we're going to be in charge of Earth afterwards.
No guarantee, I agree.
The killing part is, well, suppose we discover that there is an alien species 20 light years from Earth, and they're as much smarter than us as we are smarter than snails. Now, it might be that they're just really sweet and lovely, and all they're going to do when they come here is solve the climate challenges and lift everybody out of poverty. It's possible, but we can't be sure. So in my opinion, we shouldn't rush to immediately send them an interstellar email and say, here we are, come as fast as you can.
Black Forest, yeah.
We probably think it through
I
a
love
little
the Three Body
first.
Problem.
Yeah, me too. And
It's a great book.
we better to take a little time and think this over, right? And what I'm saying is, this is very analogous to if we build the aliens ourselves and have no idea really exactly what they want. What's the rush? I agree with you. If we go ahead and cure cancer and build all these amazing AI tools that are vastly better than.
But maybe we need to have the rush. We need to have those tools.
And then let them diffuse into society. Even we're going to get so much better off for a while, and have some time to think it over. Well, we want to now take the next step and build a smarter species. What is the rush? Why do we want to be in this race to replace when we could just take 5 more years and chill out a little bit and actually increase the odds that things go well?
Okay.
I'm not opposed.
A final word from Gary before we go to the
brief
floor.
intermediate position between them. I think we should rush to use AI for science and biology if we can adequately solve the safety problems. If we can convince ourselves that we know how to solve, or when we convince ourselves that we know how to solve the safety problems, then we should rush ahead. And until, I'm with Max that maybe we shouldn't rush if we have no idea how we're going to solve those problems.
All right, so let's open questions to the floor. First one here from the gentleman in the suits, and then we'll go second question in the funky green glasses. Please direct your question to one panelist so we can get to as many as possible.
So, Richard, you heard Gary said that we humans are resourceful motherfuckers. So how about the case of catastrophic outcomes with maliciously used AI, which are powerful, but difficult to control? Some people want to claim pieces of ISIS back there. Some other want to claim pieces of land. There is war in Ukraine. There could be war in Taiwan. What do you see? You've talked about loss of control, like self-developed. How about a socio-technical system where we, the resourceful motherfuckers, rely on a technology in an unsecure way to claim goals which are to pursuit of power? How do you feel about that? Would your point of view change if I insert the malicious notion that we humans are relying on this technology?
I do, of course, think that AI is only as good as the data, the people, and the systems that inform it. And so, as such, we should hold ourselves to an even higher standard when we use AI, because whatever we give to the AI can be then replicated millions of times. Now, it's also true that it's easier to fix one biased AI than it is to fix 1,000 biased judges' minds in AI for law, which is very, very complicated and I think should be highly regulated. But I actually also think that even, and this might be a more controversial one, I had this paper in 2018 called The AI Economist, where we actually asked an AI to come up with the best taxation and subsidy schemes. And I think it would be great if politicians gave some of their power to, not like just give it to the AI and let it do, but get at least some inputs and have the politicians kind of argue why their taxation scheme is better to get to the outcomes than an AI that could simulate billions and billions of years of taxation in a very more and more realistic simulation of the economy. And then, yeah, we may give up some of that, at least in terms of the advice.
Okay, we've got a question for Max here.
Yeah, Mario from Globals. Max, you mentioned that we are getting faster to AGI as predicted. So what should we do in this year to get ready? And especially as
in
parents.
Washington, D.C.
Sorry?
You said in Washington, D.C.?
No.
No, this year.
This year.
Oh, this year.
This year. And especially the people who are parents, what should we tell our kids to do?
Well, first you should tell your elected officials to put to stop giving special exceptions to AI companies and treat them like any normal company and put safety standards in place. I think we're going to see something like this in the US this year. We already have 131 state laws on AI in America, and there's so much political momentum now on child safety, from Bernie to Bannon. I call it the B2B coalition. But I think we'll see some stuff there, and that'll set the precedent. Then people can say, well, maybe let's add bioweapon risk or whatever to the standards. But As soon as there's anything, we're going to unleash the amazing creativity in the private industry, and the invisible hand of capitalism is going to make these companies innovate to make the safe stuff, just like we've seen in biotech, for example. The big successful biotech companies that Switzerland has a number of, they spend actually often more money on just getting rid of the bad side effects than on inventing the basic component in the drug, right? And the government shouldn't mess with this. Private industry does it just great when the government gives them the incentives.
Okay. We'll keep the question for Gary just there, and then we're going to jump to the front straight afterwards. We've still got a good amount of time, so keep the hands coming up.
Hey, Gary, you talk a lot about neurosymbolic architecture. I've read a lot of your stuff. Why do you think that hasn't come to realization? Because you think that that's the next generation.
I think that it has actually blossomed in the last couple of years. So DeepMind has done a whole bunch of things that have been pretty impressive. Alpha geometry, alpha proof, and so forth. All of the leading LLMs now include code interpreter, which is a symbolic component. They don't talk about it as neurosymbolic AI, but they are doing neurosymbolic AI. The conferences have exploded in terms of how much interest in neurosymbolic AI. I think that that is part of the next step. I've heard rumors that Ilya is working on neurosymbolic AI. If Jan's going to get his world models to work, he's going to need some symbolic stuff there, whether he acknowledges that or not. So I think it's actually been a very good couple of years.
Yeah.
There was a graph from Grok 4 when Elon unveiled it, where he showed how much progress he was getting from scaling. He didn't describe this in these terms, but you can see my Substack, how O3 and Grok 4 accidentally vindicated neurosymbolic AI. At the bottom, I have this graph. Scaling gave a little bit of the lift, but most of the lift was from using symbolic tools, incorporating inside of the LLMs. I think Richard has done some of that maybe over the years, if I understand what's going on there. I think neurosymbolic AI is actually blossoming, and I think that's a good thing.
A question at the front here?
So yesterday, the first session in the forum was about, I heard it for the first time, neuroethics. So that silicon chips come closer to our brain tissue, and that it calls highly for regulations and how we're going to use this. We have companies in the US, companies all over the world are researching how a human silicon-based entity convergence could look like. So the most imminent is the chips in the brain. So I would like to know, so how do we distinguish if there's a chip in the brain, does the human take a decision, or was the chip taking a decision? So how do we distinguish then? Because right now regulations are mainly regulating human decisions, and in the future that's maybe different.
Max?
My personal opinion, this is just an opinion, is that we should never allow humans to use AIs as a liability shield. I think there always has to be a human who's responsible for the decision. And I don't care if it's a human who has a robot who goes and kills someone, and they shouldn't be able to say, get off, oh, the robot did it. It was their robot, they're responsible. Or if someone has a bunch of chips in their brain and says, oh, it was my chip that made me do it, It's just like if you get really, really drunk and then you start driving really fast down Promenade, you're taking the responsibility at the point when you put the alcohol into your brain. I think you take the responsibility when you put the chips into your brain too. And I think we always have to let the responsibility fall back on a human.
Can I
There's a few hands. I'll throw the next question to you, if that's okay. See if you can merge in your response. There's a gentleman here in the black with the white shirt, and we'll go there and just behind straight after.
Mine is actually a question for Max. Max, if I'm understanding you correctly, you feel that there's a direct link between working on the risks and present risk from AI and bias and discrimination and countering potential human extinction.
Of course.
It seems to me that's not where the AI safety movement was before the Bletchley Park Summit. In the run-up to the Bletchley Park Summit, a lot of us who are working on the risks here and now were talking to the AI safety movement, and it seemed to me like it was more pitted one against the other, rightly or wrongly. Would you agree with that? Do you think there's been an evolution to say now, and if there is, why is that and how is that? Because if that's the case, that's really interesting in terms of, like, it helps, the clinical trials helps prevent any type of future scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful development. I think this false dichotomy between people who care about current harms, like a child getting manipulated into killing themselves, or someone who worries about future loss of control, that we're somehow on opposite sides. I think it's become clear to people on both sides of that now that they're exactly on the same team. You put in safety standards, and then stopping the current harm is just a step towards stopping other stuff. And the other side are the AI lobbyists, and Mark Andreessen, people like that, who are arguing that there should be no regulations whatsoever, and AI in this company should forever be exempt from all the rules that other companies have to face.
A question here?
Thank you. So my question is quite an old question, but I seem to identify that there's a shift in the answers at the moment on this. And I'd like to ask all of you, I'm happy for a yes-no answer, or even just, a one-sentence answer in the interest of time. But do you think AI can develop consciousness?
A one-sentence answer would be
I'll
great.
give a three-word answer.
stuff.
Three-word answer. I hope not.
Richard,
I think it'll be interesting.
Max.
But there's no answer. I want the yes, no, I don't know.
I mean, I'll give you a little bit of nuance. I think that we have enough problems controlling the current AI. We can't tell it don't hallucinate and expect that it won't do that. And it doesn't have conscious impulses. If you put conscious impulses in it, I think the chance that we'll control it is close to zero. And I don't like how that probably ends. Then I come closer to Max in my concerns.
So yes, no, I don't know.
I said, again, I hope not.
Max, a brief word on this before we go to the question.
My guess is that consciousness is a particular kind of information processing. And we already know that there are certain kinds of information processing that can be done unconsciously, like we do so many things without being aware of how we did them exactly. Like when I close my eyes and I open them and, oh my God, that's Gary. How did I take a million pixels and do that? I don't know. And we also know we can be conscious when we're not doing anything, like in our dreams. So they're two separate things. And an interesting possibility is that we'll figure out what kind of information processing is conscious and what isn't. And then maybe we'll choose to build certain AI systems like to be unconscious, so we don't have to feel guilty when we switch them off. But maybe a companion robot for your grandma, maybe you want it to be conscious so it doesn't feel so creepy when it's nice to her.
Richard,
I hope not.
Did you want to come in for the point earlier, and then we're going to go to a question at the front?
Yeah, I have a question on regulation that I struggle with, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, which is, let's postulate for 1 million miles driven, there are 1,000 car deaths because people don't follow the rules. They're on their phone, they're texting and driving, whatever, and they're drunk and so on. And now let's postulate that with self-driving, which we're already seeing now with Waymo, we could reduce that from 1,000 deaths per N miles driven to 10. But now it's 10 AI companies killing people. And also, no one will ever write an article about that, saving 990 that would have died by doing stupid stuff. And each time one of those died, well, we didn't learn anything, but in AI, for each of those very, very sad 10 cases, will really update their model. And maybe, I don't know, should they all go to prison, get felonies, or should they be celebrated for saving 990 lives? Like, how do you think about that kind of regulation?
Oh, here I think actually just binding safety standards helps the companies because it's an obvious liability shield. If what things are being evaluated on is things like, okay, how many passenger miles do you get per death or whatever, and it's clearly demonstrated before they even got licensed that they're just 10 times safer than human drivers, then society has already told them that this is okay,
But then you think it's okay for those companies to kill, potentially, a bunch of people?
We've already resolved that as a society with medicines, There are a lot of medicines that are very helpful, but that actually kill a tiny fraction of the people who take them. But it's so overwhelmingly positive that society knows, this is a risk we as a society are going to take. We're not going to put the CEO of Pfizer in jail once we have.
What if the same thing could happen with chatbots and suicide?
And people also have informed consent. They don't have to take the medicine. Right. You don't have to drive that car, And so I think having a level playing field like that, where everybody knows what the rules are, can actually help innovation.
Okay, I'm a little bit worried. Earlier, Richard, you flippantly dismissed millions of deaths, and now you're trying to justify a handful in cars. So I'm going to go to Gary
Let's not put that in my head. I did not flippantly dismiss millions of deaths. I would only want to build AI.
Just teasing, don't worry. Gary,
two brief points. One is the actual number of miles driven per death in humans is 140 million miles. So it's actually much safer than your hypothetical example. Human drivers are not great. We can certainly do better. We should replace them with machines when we can. We could have a whole conversation about when that moment might be. But you're making the arguments with Max more complicated than they should be. There's a very simple criterion which we use in medicine. I mean, it gets played out, but it's simply, do the benefits outweigh the risks?
Yeah.
And so, yes, there are going to be some deaths, but what are the benefits with the risk? And I have yet to see anybody actually make that case for generative AI, that the benefits outweigh the risk, and I have yet to see anybody outside of the CEOs of these companies have any say over whether they buy the argument or whether they think it's acceptable. And I think society should have a voice in that.
Can we have a question from the gentleman at the front?
Yep. So we talked a lot about the details here, right? Like, when does AGI come? How can we regulate it? Do medical trials make sense? How feasible they are? I want to take it like to first principles a little bit, right? So I think we agree there's maybe a path to AGI. There's maybe a risk that to humans. So if that all is true, right, like, and all we have is regulation, which tends to be punishing after the fact, right, or medical trials, which don't actually prevent something getting out. It's just, they are just preventing, or not preventing something to be invented, something to be there, just to be applied after the fact. But if AGI, by definition, is so much smarter than us, then surely we won't be able to rein it in after. Shouldn't we put all our baskets into something like some methodology like secure by design to, like, from the ground up, not allow these things to stray in a way that could be harmful?
This is why we should find alternatives to LLMs, because we can't make them secure by design, and we should make systems that are secure by design, especially if we get to broader things. And just very briefly, to go back to Nicholas's question, I think that the malicious use is, in fact, what we should be most worried about.
Can you make humans intelligent, humans who are intelligent also safe by design?
No, we cannot. And
can you make intelligence safe by design? I don't know.
No, but we don't have the asymmetry that we might have.
Exactly.
And so right now, the criminals, I mean, we have a multi-layered enforcement system. We have a system of laws. We have systems at local level, national level, and so forth. We even have international enforcement. And so there's some kind of balance there. Here, right now, it's completely one-sided.
Yeah, and no, I mean, if you have any kind of reasonable safety standards, of course, if someone develops superintelligence in 2 years, they're not going to be able to pass those clinical trials because they won't be able to guarantee that they're not going to lose control over it or whatever. So it's going to have to get back in line until maybe 10 years later someone figures out how to control it. I think it's pretty obvious at this point to anyone doing technical research on this that we're much closer to figuring out how to build superintelligence than figuring out how to control it. Me and 3 of my grad students even had a paper on exactly this at Neurosymbolic, where we took the most popular idea for controlling superintelligence, called recursive scalable oversight, and showed that it actually doesn't work at all. So
it's all garbage. There's nothing that actually works right now.
Let's try and squeeze in one last question. Gentleman with the well-groomed beard over here. You've got about a minute, so let's see if we can fit it in.
Okay. I work for the Red Cross, and I'm a bit like AI. I'm totally biased because my data set are made of conflict, war, and I'm wondering, like, we speak of, companion and stuff like that, but we know that AI is totally embedded in weapons, and I wanted to have a small take on, if we go to the next scenario, which is AI in weapons, how do we regulate? What are the standards? What are the things we have to worry about?
How should we regulate? Or I mean, the militaries of the world don't want any regulation on how they use these things. The reality is the current systems are deeply, let's say, unreliable, and that's a serious problem. And we're probably going to see a lot of people die as a consequence of people stuffing generative AI into military applications. We may not get it all reported out, but we'll probably see it. I'll say one other thing, which is people sometimes use AI as a kind of beard to, priming there, to obfuscate the human decision. So you can say, I will make an AI system to decide my military targets, and then you blame the AI system, but really you're setting a criteria, how many acceptable collateral deaths, right? And that's really the human decision that's actually calculating most of the variance. And so people will say, well, it's a machine, it's not my fault, which goes to Max's point. You've authorized this machine to do this with this criterion, it's on you.
Yeah, we should obviously and highly regulate AI in military applications. It would be insane not to.
Max, final word?
I agree.
Okay, please join me in thanking the panelists.